Oh, let's have a quick one. Let's continue the conversation around the budget and the state of the nation with what we have on our hands. Yesterday evening, of course, Moody's Investors Services, one of the largest three rating agencies globally, downgraded Nigeria's sovereign issuer rating to a B2 with a stable outlook. But why did we get a stable outlook? This was part of what the rationale for the stable outlook. That's what that section really was in this report by Moody's, and went on to say that Nigeria's oil production remains stable and that our oil production between 2018 and 2020 will average 2.3 million barrels per day. That's exact words, the same outlook that the president gave a couple of hours earlier in his budget 2018 draft presentations. Moody's also expects Nigeria's real GDP growth to be 3.3% in 2018. The president spoke about 3.5%. That's not significantly different from what came out later. There was also talk about the joint venture arrangement and what Nigeria's oil production, the dollar earnings will likely to continue to improve over the coming 2 years. That's part of what Moody's Investor Services says yesterday in this report. But let's get this continued conversation with our guests and analysts here in the studio. We got Michael Famaroti, who is an economist at Vetiva Capital Management. Michael, good morning. It's good to have you.
Morning.
And still on Skype, Bismarck Rewani, economist and chief executive officer at Financial Derivatives Company. Mr. Rewani, thank you very much. That part of the keeping the stable outlook on the economy, it looks like there's a bit of a, not so much of a divergence here between some of the outlook from Moody's as per what the outlook is for the economy and what the president says yesterday.
Definitely not. I agree with what Moody's says. Moody's is saying essentially that strategically and structurally, you are in good shape, but the tactical issues which you have to deal with today, you have to do some things or else your vulnerabilities in the short term will actually increase because you are in an electoral cycle. And when there's an electoral cycle, populist reforms become dominant while structural reforms become recessive. So what they're trying to send is send a signal that don't be carried away by politics and promises to the public, while in fact you are leaving the more critical and strategic issues that you have to deal with. And that is why at the earlier part of the discussion I said, let's differentiate between spending, consumption, and investing. What you are seeing is a lot of money being spent on consumption, which is the recurrent, and then debt service, which is on salaries, but very limited amount of money being invested for capacity and capital formation. That is where the real issue is. So again, going away from potential to reality. Nigeria, we talk about potential. Everybody knows the problems. Everybody knows the potential. But when it comes to executing and making the impact, it becomes, we now begin to talk of homegrown solutions. The Nigerian economy is not any different from any other economy in the world. And therefore, we should not lower our standards by trying to actually play around with semantics about solutions to the problem.
Michael, let's take that rope from Bismarck Rewani when you talk about how do we spend in this budget. You're coming from an investment side of the market. So investment is key. We've always been spending. We've been building roads. We've been building bridges. We've built almost everything under the sun. But we haven't really been able to create wealth. We haven't really been able to get people, to take more people, massive people, out of poverty to a standard of living and raise them, build them from there perhaps into a new millionaire and billionaire clubs without being a rent seeker and sitting on the shoulder of the government. Give us your thoughts on this angle.
Yeah, I like what he said about Nigeria not being a unique country, because to a large extent, a lot of the challenges that we are facing are challenges that most economies have had to or will have to face them, right? So we need to build an industrial base. It's not a new challenge. Part of it is going to be funded by the federal government, but given the sheer size of what is required, it's an impossible task. So we speak about the budget being 8.6 trillion. Again, he mentioned that relative to our GDP, that's very small. That's less than 10%. Relative to what we need to spend on roads and rail, what we actually do is very small. So we need greater participation from the private sector.
Is the private sector ready, willing, and able to partner with the government to bring the money to the table?
I think potentially yes.
Now we just get back to that. Potentially.
Yes.
Why are we always about potential?
What is lacking is a framework.
Mr. Mark just spoke about the reality to move from, to make that progress from potential to promise to progress.
Yeah, I think we've seen that there are instances where we've tried to move from potential to reality and we've fallen flat because the right framework is not in place. So take public-private partnerships, for example. That's a very profitable area in principle, right? But it's about getting it right. And there is no coherent framework yet that has been put forward by the government in that this is our approach to PPP in infrastructure or in transport or in airports, right? It's all a case of, yes, we want private sector funding, and that's natural, that's fine, but what is the framework that you are going to set out that can attract private participants? Because the money is there in the private sector, the will is there. What they need is confidence and clarity in your chosen framework.
Is that what you are hearing, you and your team at Vertiva, when you speak to investors, folks with deep pockets? Is that their chief concern about doing business with the government?
I think generally in any country, the main determinant of how you do business with government is clarity on regulation going forward and clarity on how the government is going to operate. And to some extent, this government has done that in terms of its fiscal policy and so on. But in terms of its framework in dealing with the private sector, it's something that they need to do a lot of work on. And that's reflected in the ease of doing business. The fact that for the new National Action Plan, one area that they're focusing on is public procurement. So clarifying what SMEs need to do to supply to governments. So those are ways that they can have an impact.
I remember procurement coming up from Dr. Bukola Saraki, the Senate President, yesterday. The